Energy and Mineral Resources will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Carl, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, the Energy and Minerals Resources Subcommittee will examine the Biden administration's unprecedented obstruction of the BOEM Offshore Leasing Program. The last time Director Klein was here, we discussed the BOEM's budget and predicted that while asking for a funding increase, they would manage to do less with it. Here we are 6 months later, and that prediction has come true. Today's hearing will focus on the proposed final National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program, which has arrived 457 days late and contains the fewest offshore lease sales in the program's history. Just 3 potential sales over the next 5 years. Under the Biden administration's 5-year program, we will not have lease sales next year, and the earliest that a sale can occur is 2025. And there will not be a single sale in the great state of Alaska through 2029. Further, BOEM has previously communicated to this committee that the NEPA process for these sales could take up to 2 years. As of today, BOEM has purposely not begun the NEPA process for the 2025 lease sales, putting them in jeopardy. We've seen the Biden administration's rationale for policy decisions like this play out with disastrous results. The magnitude of the global demand for oil and gas calls for something much more substantial than 3 lease sales. But instead of American energy dominance, this administration would rather beg Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and other OPEC countries for increased oil production. Just this week, the Wall Street Journal reported this administration is pursuing a backroom deal with Venezuela to lift U.S. sanctions and pave the way for Venezuelan oil to hit the global markets. This administration's energy policy is anywhere but America, any worker but American. It's the same policy for mining. BOEM's 5-year plan does not demonstrate a commitment to energy independence, nor does it balance environmental interests. In 1987, President Reagan put out a draft plan with 42 proposed sales, 17 of which were included in the final plan. That was a show of commitment. If BOEM truly wanted to show the United States is committed to more offshore production, they would assemble a forward-looking strategy to streamline the burdensome permitting process. They would establish a regulatory framework that balances safety, environmental stewardship, and predictability, affording companies a clearer look. They would publish a 5-year plan with expanded leasing opportunities across historically utilized planning areas that incorporates pragmatic avenues for bolstering existing production, as well as more aggressive agenda for amplifying offshore output. Bottom line, an aggressive offshore leasing strategy would clearly demonstrate a true commitment to our nation's long-term energy security and to the workers and their families who rely on a paycheck from the offshore industry. Director Klein, for your awareness, there are more than 360,000 American workers who work in the offshore industry and millions more who support the broader oil and gas industry. That kind of commitment would not go unnoticed. Companies trying to decide where to invest their leasing dollars would know that the United States is in fact committed to growing production on the outer continental shelf. And don't forget, oil from the Gulf of Mexico has lower GHG emissions intensity compared to almost all other global producers. Leasing is the fundamental building block upon which future oil and gas production is built. So much of oil and gas forecasting, such as global supply, global demand, and price fluctuations, is out of our control. But leasing is something we can control, and failing to properly carry out a robust leasing plan now will have damaging effects for decades to come. By failing to act, we're putting our future squarely in the hands of adversarial nations around the world. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing their testimony. I now will yield to my colleague from New York, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, for her opening statements.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Director Klein and our witnesses for being here today. Today, for the first time in 4 months, our colleagues across the aisle have gathered us here to discuss how the Biden administration needs to do more for offshore oil and gas. It appears that this may be part of a broader campaign today to distract from the current House Republican chaos and their failures to elect a speaker or have a coherent plan to fund the government. But regardless, let's get into this. Today, we'll hear that the Biden administration needs to sell more oil and gas leases to big oil off our coasts to ensure, quote, energy security, unquote, and our economic futures. But let's be clear. Big oil does not need more handouts. Oil and gas companies already control 12 million acres of federal water in the Gulf of Mexico alone. Over 75% of the leases industry holds remain unused. And to my own disappointment, the administration plans to hold 3 more lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico over the next 3 years, locking us into decades of future development. But still, this is never enough. If we want to have any chance of staving off the worst impacts of the climate crisis, it is essential that we begin to phase out fossil fuel extraction from federal lands and waters. Right now, the United States is the largest producer and the largest exporter of oil and gas in the world. And despite how my colleagues from across the aisle may make it seem, production in the Gulf of Mexico is at an all-time high. Oil companies are raking in billions of dollars in record profits, and CEOs are giving themselves tens of millions of dollars in salaries and bonuses, all while decreasing fossil fuel worker pay and systematically laying off the workforce. Despite this record production, record CEO pay, and record profit, Americans are still at the whim of the global market when it comes to energy prices here at home. Today's hearing focuses on how the Biden administration should somehow give away more public resources to big oil, all while the Gulf region experiences simultaneous crises caused both directly and indirectly by offshore drilling and fossil fuel development. As we speak, Louisiana, one of the states typically with the highest rainfall in the country, is experiencing an unprecedented wildfire season. In August, over 550 fires in Louisiana burned more than 60,000 acres, forcing entire towns to flee the flames. Governor Edwards warned that this wildfire risk is, quote, the new normal for the state. Drought, subsidence, rising seas, and man-made changes to the river have led to historically low water levels in the Mississippi River and allowed salt water from the Gulf of Mexico to creep up into local water sources. Thousands of people are already suffering from water that is unsafe to drink. It is corroding infrastructure and leaching heavy metals into drinking water systems. Hundreds of thousands of people in New Orleans could be threatened. Of course, there are also the ever-threatening hurricanes caused by climate change and the loss of wetlands from oil and gas infrastructure, the very natural barriers that are supposed to protect coastal communities from storms. There is abandoned oil and gas infrastructure, thousands of miles of pipelines littering the seafloor, which, if oil and gas companies paid to fully reclaim, could employ thousands of oil and gas workers as we look to transition and clean up the Gulf waters, but are more often left on the seafloor to pollute. There are also the public health impacts, increased rates of asthma and diseases like cancer around fossil fuel infrastructure, which disproportionately harm communities of color and low-income Americans. Yet time and time again, we continue to see the failure to consider any of these impacts of offshore drilling. I implore my colleagues to recognize these impacts and, instead of asking for more drilling, have productive conversations about a managed decline of fossil fuels, a transition that puts workers, communities, and climate first so we don't make the same mistakes again as we shape a clean energy future. Offshore wind has enormous potential in the Gulf and across all our coasts to support family-sustaining union jobs and make our federal waters part of the climate solution rather than part of the problem. I look forward to our hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. And we are going to, normally I'm pretty generous if you go over time on 5 minutes, but I think with what we have going on, I've talked to the ranking member staff as well, we're going to keep it to 5 minutes, and you'll hear the gavel, so really quickly wrap it up, and I appreciate that. We will move now to introduce our witnesses. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press talk button on the microphone. And we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow witnesses to testify before member questioning. Before we announce our first witness, I will ask the chair of the full committee, Bruce Westerman, for 5 minutes on his statement.
Thank you, Chairman Stauber. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And I would like to add, when we talk about oil company profits, when you restrict supply and demand increases, prices go up, and oil companies make a lot more money. Not only American oil companies, but OPEC. Saudi Arabia had one of the largest, or had the largest profit of any oil company in history last year. Iran is producing much more oil than they've ever produced. They're generating a lot of money because of high prices and low demand, and they're stepping in to fill that demand. And they're also funding terrorists who are attacking innocent people. And just when we thought the Biden administration's posture towards American energy couldn't get any worse, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management published the long-awaited National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program, commonly known as the 5-year plan, after an unprecedented 457-day delay. This plan slashed proposed offshore energy sales from a potential of 11 to a pitiful 3, completely eliminating any sales in 2024, 2026, and 2028. This plan is nothing short of sabotage to our nation's energy security. It's not just negligence. It's a calculated move that strikes at the heart of American competitiveness and opportunity and seeks to undermine our prosperity and cede global dominance to our adversaries, a move that's particularly concerning now amid growing instability in the Middle East. Industry investments should be driven by the private sector and ingenuity of the American worker. Instead, our energy economy is dictated and micromanaged by DC bureaucrats focused only on shutting down domestic production. The offshore industry has evolved and innovated and now produces oil and gas with the lowest emissions. The federal government has unfortunately only obstructed this progress in recent years, causing bottlenecks in permit approvals, arbitrarily dictating where and when industry operations can occur, and raising fees to make production less economical. The 5-year plan announcement will only serve to outsource our energy demand to OPEC plus nations, increasing global emissions in the process. The decision makers in the Biden administration have proposed the fewest opportunities to extract the cleanest barrels of oil on Earth over the next 5 years. They've left Alaskans without an opportunity for future sales for the first time in the history of the leasing program, even as their neighbors in Russia and Canada are producing more than ever. President Biden has obstructed the offshore leasing program at every turn. He first canceled every remaining sale in the previous 5-year plan, which he only held after being explicitly required by Congress. He then sought to undermine one of these sales by going around the regulatory process to cut a deal with environmentalists that would stymie production resulting from that sale. Now he has proposed the fewest sales in the history of the program. These actions undoubtedly undermine our position in the global energy landscape, which is critical as armed conflict is increasing around the globe. Today, our subcommittee will seek answers from the Biden administration on this dismal plan. Now is the moment to change course and steer our energy future in the right direction. Our producers deserve opportunities to make investments with regulatory certainty. American taxpayers deserve fair return on the nation's natural resources. The environment and consumers around the world deserve to purchase the lowest carbon intensity barrels produced on the planet for centuries to come. I look forward to the testimony and the discussion, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chair Westerman. I will now introduce our witness. Our first witness is Mr. Tommy Faucheux. He is the president of Louisiana Mid-Continental Oil and Gas Association located in Baton Rouge. Mr. Faucheux, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Graves, other members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Tommy Faucheux. I'm the president of the Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, also known as LMOGA. Before I begin talking about the issues at hand today, I do want to first acknowledge the tragedy in Israel, the lives lost in this past week, and acknowledge the tragedy as many of these people are now put in a path of war. These recent events remind us that our liberties are fleeting, and before any advocacy on energy issues comes first the importance of decency and moral clarity in public discourse. I am here today to speak on behalf of our industry members, who include the upstream, midstream, and downstream operators in Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico. While the oil and gas industry has a $70 billion impact on our state, my comments today are specific to the 2024-29 National OCS Oil and Gas Leasing Proposed Final Program, or the 5-year program. For generations, Louisianans have always been at the forefront of energy innovation, and we continue to be the pioneers in energy. Today, I'm excited to say that we have established the regulatory framework, workforce, infrastructure, and industrial sector to lead the way in transforming the industry towards a lower carbon future. Through carbon capture, utilization, and storage, thanks to Louisiana ingenuity and hard work, and commitments from Congress and the Biden administration, we are on the precipice of a major generational shift in this exciting field. We consistently look for ways for meaningful engagement with disadvantaged communities impacted by environmental justice and create opportunities in education, workforce development, and employment. On this journey, robust, predictable oil and gas production in the Gulf of Mexico is an integral piece of the puzzle. For decades, the Gulf of Mexico has produced some of the most energy-dense and lowest carbon mineral resources in the world. The Biden administration acknowledges this fact in its proposed 5-year program, that a lack in oil and gas lease sales in the GOM would yield a much higher environmental impact, as the gap in domestic production will be filled by producers from other basins whose geology is not as favorable and whose production occurs under much less stringent environmental standards. Offshore oil and natural gas development supports over 350,000 jobs throughout the U.S., contributing billions to the economy and local, state, and federal tax revenues. The offshore oil and gas industry contributes an estimated $4 to $5 billion annually to the federal treasury. Specifically in Louisiana, 250,000 Louisianans, 1 out of every 9 people, work in this industry. Our state's ability to reduce the impact of catastrophic hurricanes through coastal restoration and flood protection depends on a predictable source of revenue from offshore production. Without regulatory certainty and a predictable, robust 5-year program, many of these benefits are at risk. When President Biden paused oil and gas leasing on federal lands and waters, we saw consumer energy prices rise to historic levels, capital investments freeze, and a decline in much-needed revenue for coastal restoration. As the administration proceeds to finalize regulations in the coming months, such as the very important proposed bonding and financial assurance rule, our regulators must ensure the GOM remains a viable and attractive investment option for operators of all sizes. Despite statutory requirements to schedule lease sales, the proposed 5-year program is 16 months behind schedule and will only ensure, at best, 3 offshore lease sales over the course of the program. This means after lease sale 261, which the department was court-ordered to hold, we will not see another opportunity to access new offshore acreage until 2025, due to the length of time it takes to develop, propose for public comment, and finalize a notice of sale. The next lease sale likely may not occur until much later. LMOGA and our industry partners believe Congress must act this year to instead provide greater certainty. We support legislative efforts that are before this committee and others that have passed the U.S. House this Congress. H.R. 1, the Lower Energy Costs Act, sponsored by Leader Scalise, Congressman Graves' Bridge Production Act, and Senator Cassidy's Offshore Energy Security Act, include language important to providing certainty to our energy and environmental goals. These bills send a clear directive to the administration that America is committed to providing affordable, reliable energy to American families and businesses and our allies abroad. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts, and I look forward to further discussion today.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next witness is Mr. Jerry Moses. and he is the Director of State and Federal Relations for Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy, and he is stationed in both Juneau, Alaska, and right here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Moses, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, and other members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity today to testify on behalf of the state of Alaska and Governor Mike Dunleavy. The governor appreciates the oversight of this committee, especially on the impacts of this BOEM 5-year plan decision, recent decision. As was noted earlier, there are proposed 0 leases for Alaska, which we're quite worried about. So we'd like to maybe clear up some of these errors and omissions that were asserted for the reasoning for that decision. Biden administration policy in general has been disastrous for Alaska and its people. No other federal administration in our state's brief history has so brazenly and recklessly worked to forestall nearly every type of natural resource development opportunity, which I'll get into a little bit later. We in Alaska, like all Americans, are threatened by these types of actions that restrict our domestic energy production opportunities and make our entire country less energy secure. We maintain our demand that, consistent with the spirit and letter of the OCS Lands Act, that this administration acknowledge that additional leasing is necessary in Alaska and other OCS regions in order to meet our national energy needs. In this time of increasing geopolitical turmoil, we should be doing everything within our power to grow our national economy and boost our domestic energy production. Particularly in Alaska, our longstanding source of natural gas to power our businesses and heat Alaskan homes is the Cook Inlet area, which has seen the development of oil and natural gas for nearly 70 years. As people familiar with Alaska know, that most of the residents live within that region, on the railbelt region. Anchorage is part of the Cook Inlet region and connects the major metropolitan areas of Alaska. As these gas fields have aged in the Cook Inlet, additional supplies have been increasingly challenging to develop, and which leads to higher production costs and consequently, and unfortunately, higher consumer prices. To counter that, we're looking at all available options to address this critical public need. The most obvious option, which is now off the table under this plan, is developing the resources that are right next door in the Cook Inlet OCS. There's no shortage of potential resources on these lands. BOEM's own estimates show billions of cubic feet of gas resources that could be produced in the Cook Inlet area. We know why this is off the table. BOEM's own internal memoranda indicate that avoiding speculative and hypothetical climate impacts is more important to the agency than ensuring a reliable energy supply for hundreds of thousands of Alaskans. We believe that decision is indefensible. This administration hides behind the rhetoric of limited demand for leases or limited interest to develop these resources. The full story is a little more complicated than that. It's our assertion that the asserted limited demand for that is due to overregulation by the government, and the fact that producers simply have no confidence that this administration will actually approve permits to develop those resources. BOEM's policy is entirely at odds with the OCS Lands Act, the public interest, and common sense. BOEM has 0 lease sales scheduled again in the area of Alaska. We have a proven ability to develop those resources and a market that desperately needs those resources. This testimony today prioritizes the Cook Inlet region, but the entire region of Alaska is off the board under this proposal, particularly the North Slope of Alaska, where we've already developed and extracted 18 billion barrels of oil. This is consistent with other actions that have been taken by this administration in Alaska, which are particularly egregious from our point of view, which is the cancellation of the ANWR leases recently, and also the proposed rule for the NPRA, which would cut off 13 million acres from future development and future generations of Alaskans. To wrap up briefly, thank you again for inviting me to testify today on this topic, which is so vitally important to our state. The state of Alaska believes the current plan, 5-year plan, is fundamentally deficient because it fails to even hold 1 lease sale in the Cook Inlet region and support the critical energy needs of the residents of Alaska. We implore this committee and Congress in general to restore sanity and promote rational energy policy at this critical time in our nation's history.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Moses, Minnesota has the most mineral wealth of any nation in this country, or any state in our nation, with the exception of Alaska. I thank you. I'm now going to introduce Mr. Shane Seel. He's Executive Director for the Southern Ute Growth Fund located in Colorado. Mr. Seel, you're up for 5 minutes.
Duichkus, good morning. Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, and committee members. My name is Shane Seel. I'm an enrolled member of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and Executive Director of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe Growth Fund. Thank you for inviting me to participate and be before you today. For decades, our tribe has come to Congress to discuss the prudent development of energy resources. Right here in this great hall, many leaders I have to acknowledge that have gone on and been here before us, just like your relatives have been here before us as well. And I acknowledge them that have passed on to the next world. I'm connected to them as I sit here today on the foundation that they have built for our great tribe. Our reservation is in southwest Colorado. Our tribe is the largest employer in the region. We have a AAA credit rating, and our members have jobs, health insurance, and the opportunity to obtain a college or vocational degree. Our elders have stable retirement benefits, and we are on the way to providing future generations the opportunity to maintain our tribe, our culture, and our lands in perpetuity. The tribe's economic success has been tied to development of oil and gas resources. Almost 25 years ago, Tribal Council separated our business activity from our tribal governance and created the Southern Ute Indian Tribe Growth Fund. It has blossomed into a diverse portfolio of energy and non-energy investments across 16 states and the Gulf of Mexico. Over the last 2 decades, we have participated in many Gulf lease sales. The Gulf is one of the few places in the U.S. where conventional reservoirs still occurs, allowing businesses that lack large existing acreage positions to compete for new opportunities. That speaks volumes for us as being a small tribe. The tribe's interests in the offshore leasing program are similar to those of the U.S. The revenues received by the tribe through the Growth Fund are a major funding source for our reservation schools, healthcare facilities, law enforcement, and cultural preservation. In the same way, over the past 20 years, offshore energy resources have provided over $134 billion of revenue to the U.S. Treasury, funding daily government operations and providing security and services to Americans. From 2000 to 2020, the average number of OCS lease sales was 3.4 per year. In the past 3 years, only 3 lease sales have occurred, with 2 of them being mandated by the Inflation Reduction Act. The next lease sale is scheduled to occur on November 8th of this year. For the next 5 years, BOEM has proposed to reduce the number of size of offshore lease sales from initial 47 to 3. This would make a calendar year 2024 the first year in more than 60 years that a federal offshore lease sale will not be held. The latest program reflects the Secretary's determination to end global reliance on fossil fuel energy by 2050. However, the process and the effects of replacing fossil fuels, or like I like to say, hydrocarbons, with energy substitutes are unreliable. The uncertainty has created surrounding offshore leasing needs to be eliminated. Unnecessary gaps in the program erode the future availability of energy resources. Today, over 80% of global energy consumed is fossil-based, providing heat, electricity, fuel, and products used to build homes and electric cars. About 50 million people qualify as low income and face a high energy burden. Expensive energy creates a strain on low income families, forcing them to make tough financial choices. Last January, in our neck of the woods, pricing reached a record high, $43 per MMBTU, due to low storage levels, increased seasonal demand, and limited pipeline infrastructure. Some of our bills increased $1,000 per month. To keep energy both affordable and available, adequate supplies of oil and gas are needed, while an aggressive transition to carbon neutrality occurs. I hope this testimony provides helpful information regarding the importance of OCS leasing to the tribe and the United States. We believe in the objective to achieve carbon neutral energy production and believe continued leasing and development of offshore resources are necessary elements of the energy transition, the maintenance of national security, and assuring economic stability in the U.S. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next witness is Ms. Megan Biven, who is the founder of True Transition. She is from Louisiana, but currently lives in Vienna, Austria. Ms. Biven, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify here today. My name is Megan Biven, the founder of True Transition, an organization dedicated to American energy produced by American workers for the benefit of American communities. Prior to this, I served within the Department of the Interior's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, where I performed programmatic policy analysis and helped execute offshore lease sales. I sit here today in an optimistic mood because as divided as we Americans may seem to be, we actually do want the same things: energy security, a healthy and clean environment, good and safe jobs, shared prosperity, and a future we can be proud to leave to our children. To me, these hopes represent a strong foundation on which to build consensus. We are here to consider the staggered 5-year program leasing schedule. I would like to suggest that this slowing down of the Gulf of Mexico conveyor belt presents an opportunity. Instead of focusing on delivering a lease sale every 6 months, let us instead focus on delivering our offshore workers back to their families at the end of their hitch. True Transition recently conducted a national survey of American oil and gas workers. The results, which include responses from over 1,600 American workers, revealed troubling attitudes towards safety. For Gulf Coast states, over a third of respondents said they would hesitate to raise a workplace safety issue for fear of employer reprisal. Regulation on the OCS is more red carpet than red tape, and it's our workers who pay the price. I see a few immediate actions that this body can take to improve its governance of this program and the safety of our federal waters. The recent disaster of the Seacor Power and near misses Deepwater Asgard and the Noble Globetrotter II demonstrate a tension between the boardroom and the ship's bridge. And there should be no room for craven calls from a Houston high-rise while American workers face danger on a stormy Gulf. Therefore, I recommend that this body directs Bessie and Coast Guard to create and issue a universal trigger to cease activity and commit to evacuation procedures during inclement weather. Louisiana recently passed Jacob's Law, which mandates GPS beacons for offshore aircraft travel to and from Louisiana heliports. I recommend that Bessie build upon this success and require that all operators provide beacons to all OCS workers, regardless of their work function. It is time to make these pieces of life-saving equipment mandatory on the OCS. A lease sale every 6 months doesn't actually guarantee jobs anymore. While we have doubled production on the shelf, production jobs have cratered. The industry has learned to produce more with less workers. But you know what could create jobs? 18,000 miles of no longer in use pipelines sitting on the seafloor. Enforcing decommissioning obligations could begin immediately, utilizing workforces and docked vessels today. A 2022 study estimates that decommissioning Gulf of Mexico infrastructure would create over 5,000 jobs per year. This is not counting the indirect jobs and scrap value of materials rotting and rusting in the Gulf, particularly steel. There's a second industrial act just waiting on the seafloor. The OCS Gulf of Mexico leasing program with its biannual sales is an inherited policy of 1970s Project Independence. Project Independence focused on shoring up American resources and building American capacity for Americans. We are producing more oil and gas now than we have at any point in American history. Our current posture, however, is one increasingly focused on export of American natural gas, and thanks to the 2015 repeal, crude oil. American exports of crude oil have increased by 878% since the repeal. Indeed, in a time period of less than 2 months, we export more crude oil than the entire 2022 Strategic Petroleum Reserve emergency withdrawal. Exports of natural gas also increased by 507%. Despite an abundance of domestic natural gas resources, last year we experienced the largest annual increase in average residential electricity spending on record. If we are going to pit American offshore wind, destined to power American homes, against natural gas or crude oil destined for foreign shores, I believe the American people deserve an honest answer on why. We sometimes forget that we are the beneficiaries of deliberate planning. The modern American oil and gas supply chain was made possible by the steady hand and patient capital of the American government. The diversification of our domestic energy supply will necessitate nothing less. We need a plan. We need to diversify our domestic energy supply. We are leaving gigawatts of energy and local good jobs on the table. All I ask is that we get to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our last witness is Ms. Liz Klein, who is Director for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, located right here in Washington, D.C. Director Klein, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, members of the subcommittee, I am pleased to appear before you today to discuss the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's development of the 2024-2029 National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program. My name is Liz Klein, and I am the Director of BOEM at the Department of the Interior. This administration is committed to ensuring safe and responsible domestic oil and gas production that meets the country's energy needs while minimizing impacts to the environment. The Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, or OXLA, requires BOEM to prepare and periodically revise an oil and gas leasing program that includes a proposed schedule of oil and gas lease sales for the 5-year period following approval of the program. This is, of course, referred to as the National OCS Oil and Gas Leasing Program, or the National OCS Program, sometimes the 5-year plan, as specified by Section 18 of OXLA. Preparation and approval of a National OCS program is based on the Secretary of the Interior balancing specific requirements and factors and selecting the size, timing, and location of OCS lease sales that best meet regional and national energy needs and consider the impact of oil and gas exploration on the marine, coastal, and human environments. The proposed final program includes 3 potential OCS oil and gas lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico program area scheduled for 2025, 2027, and 2029. These 3 potential lease sales were chosen because they have the greatest resource potential and net benefits with the least potentially significant impacts and costs to society. The Secretary believes that this proposed schedule will best meet national energy needs for the next 5 years under existing laws and policies. The 3 potential sales in the proposed final program will also enable the department to continue to issue offshore wind leases in compliance with the provision of the Inflation Reduction Act that prohibits BOEM from issuing new offshore wind leases unless it is offered at least 60 million acres for oil and gas leasing on the OCS in the previous year. This proposed final program thus ensures continued progress toward the administration's goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. The area considered for leasing has been narrowed to the Gulf of Mexico OCS, where there is existing production and infrastructure. This area includes the portions of the western, central, and eastern Gulf of Mexico planning areas not currently under presidential withdrawal. The Cook Inlet program area in Alaska, which has generated low industry interest for many years, including in Lease Sale 258, has not been included in the potential lease sale schedule. Following the publication of the proposed final program and final programmatic environmental impact statement, a 60-day waiting period is required before the Secretary can formally approve the program and finalize a record of decision. The Secretary has committed to issuing that final decision on the next National OCS program by the end of calendar year 2023. BOEM also recently published a call for information and nominations in the Federal Register regarding the potential future Gulf of Mexico oil and gas lease sales included in the next National OCS program. Simultaneously, BOEM also published a notice of intent to prepare a programmatic environmental impact statement under NEPA to analyze the potential impacts of a representative sale in the Gulf of Mexico during the next National OCS program, as well as the ongoing and potential associated site and activity-specific oil and gas-related approvals. Collectively, these actions will allow BOEM to move forward on implementing the new program. Chairman Stauber and Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, thank you again for the opportunity to be here today to discuss BOEM's efforts to create an oil and gas leasing program that will meet the nation's energy needs while minimizing impacts to the human, marine, and coastal environment. The National OCS program remains a core element of the administration's continued commitment to ensuring a clean and low-cost energy future, one that is sustainable and benefits all Americans. I look forward to working with the subcommittee on these important issues, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you or members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Klein. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Director Klein, on average, previous administrations have only held about half of the lease sales they have included in their respective 5-year plans. The plan put forth by the Biden administration includes 3 lease sales over the next 5 years. How many lease sales will the Biden administration hold over the next 5 years?
The proposed final program puts out a schedule of 3 lease sales. Those are scheduled to take place in 2025, 2027, and 2029. The Secretary, as I've mentioned, has committed to putting out a final decision on that proposed final program before the end of the year. We've started the NEPA process for the first lease sales in 2025.
Director Klein, real quick, just yes or no. Are you planning on holding 3 lease sales?
The proposed final program plans to hold 3 lease sales.
The proposed is to hold 3. Are you guaranteeing 3?
I don't know that I'll be here in 2025, so can't say what will happen at that time, but the proposed final program proposes 3 lease sales.
Okay. By not providing the firm answer, it's very clear that the administration is refusing to commit to holding offshore lease sales. Director Klein, how long does the NEPA process typically take for offshore lease sales?
The NEPA process to evaluate the potential impacts of proposed lease sales in the 5-year plan generally takes anywhere from 16 to 18 months, possibly 2 years. We've started that process and feel confident we can complete it before the scheduled lease sale in 2025.
Have you started did you say you started the NEPA process on these proposed lease sales, these 3?
Yes, we issued a notice of intent at the same time that we issued the proposed final program.
And when was that? What date was that on?
September 29th, I think, was the date we issued the proposed final
Okay.
program.
Okay, September 29th to 23? Mm-hmm. So we're looking at least to 25 and beyond.
We feel confident that the NEPA process that's necessary to hold a lease sale in 2025 can be completed in time to hold that sale in 2025.
I just wanted to remind you that BOEM's deputy director shared with this committee that the process can take as long as 2 years, and you would agree with that?
Sometimes NEPA processes can take 2 years. The process that we've started with the notice of intent to evaluate these sales, we feel confident we can complete that in 2025.
Director Klein, when does the Biden administration plan to finalize its 5-year plan?
As I mentioned, the proposed final program, there's a 60-day required period before a record of decision can be issued. The Secretary is committed to issuing a decision before the end of this year.
So we could say December 31st?
I'm hoping to avoid the holidays.
Okay, before the holidays. Okay. Based on BOEM's own logic and math, if the plan is finalized before the holidays and the NEPA process begins immediately, as you said, in September, the first lease sale isn't going to realistically be held until like December of 2025 or beyond. Again, this is based on BOEM's own math. Director Klein, will you commit to holding a lease sale in 2025 as outlined in the 5-year plan?
We have started the NEPA process for any potential lease sales that might take place in the 5-year plan, including that first one in 2025. I think we've also indicated our keen interest in order to meet the administration's offshore wind goals that we wish to hold offshore wind lease sales.
Director Klein, thank you for your response. You can't commit to that. I really hope this administration commits to a lease sale in 2025. But based on its track record, I remain incredibly skeptical. Mr. Moses, can you please provide some background on the importance of the Cook Inlet for Alaskan and American energy security?
As I indicated a little earlier in my testimony, the Cook Inlet area supplies the natural gas to the railboat region of Alaska, where the great majority of our residents live. Nearly half of our residents are in Anchorage alone, and that goes up to Fairbanks through Wasilla, the Mat-Su, and other areas. And that supply is dwindling, and there's no firm estimate exactly when that might be gone, but that is critical to cheap energy prices for Alaskans. Being from Fairbanks originally, the cost of heating up there with oil is 4 to 5 times what it is.
So, Mr. Moses, real quick, is it your understanding that the Alaskans didn't want sales in the Cook Inlet?
No,
Okay, I got 5 seconds left. Do you believe the administration was actually listening to Alaskans when it sought public comment from them?
we do not. As I stated earlier, we
Thank you
believe-
very much, because I'm keeping myself on time too, so. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Biven, in your testimony, you highlight that oil and gas production on the outer continental shelf has doubled in the last decade. Yet in Louisiana, direct employment in oil and gas extraction has fallen by 27%, correct?
Yes.
And you also write that jobs for drilling oil and gas wells have plummeted by 62% between 2008 and 2019, correct?
Yes, that's from an El Mogo report, yes.
That's staggering. When we're talking about even just job creation in general, the job development of this industry has been plummeting. We've heard witnesses tout the job benefits of offshore oil and gas, but it is undeniable that the workforce is already in transition. Ms. Biven, you highlight several key opportunities, though, for the federal government to support this workforce and spur economic activity. Could you outline what some of those opportunities are?
Absolutely. I want to provide a little context on why those jobs are declining. The industry is just getting better at producing more oil and gas. They're hitting deeper plays, and they just require less service companies and less workers. And so that is why there's been a bipartisan, enthusiastic support for offshore wind in Louisiana. But decommissioning of retired infrastructure no longer in use provides a huge opportunity for workforce, specifically those 18,000 miles of pipelines that are decommissioned in place. They're serving no commercial purpose. They're just sitting on the seafloor. And, those operators agreed with the federal government to remove them, and that provides an opportunity for workers today. The Secretary of the Interior can order those companies today to remove them, and that'll put boats that are docked to work, that'll put workers to work. And then, of course, there's idled oil and gas wells. There's a lot of opportunities.
So we can start the process of spurring an enormous amount of job creation just by enforcing and demanding the cleanup of these 18,000 miles of pipeline, correct?
Absolutely.
And these decommissioning and coastal restoration jobs can help bridge the gap as we stand up the offshore wind industry in the Gulf, which offshore oil and gas workers are particularly well equipped to take up. Can you expand on how the federal government can support a transition for these oil and gas workers to ensure that good, dignified, family-sustaining jobs in clean energy like offshore wind can continue?
For sure, and indeed, it's a precondition for a lot of the work that we want to do. Those pipelines, those unplugged oil and gas wells, they're in the way of borrow areas for coastal restoration projects. If we want big dredge boats out there dredging for sand to rebuild Louisiana's coast, we need to remove that infrastructure. But a sustained commitment to diversification and decarbonization of our economy is necessary for a just transition. And one idea we have proposed is the creation, for instance, of a new federal administration, the Abandoned Well Administration, because we know that there are thousands of unplugged oil and gas wells, both onshore and offshore. And what we're seeing is that even though we're providing an ample amount of federal funds, that states are still finding it difficult to have the equipment and people to do this work swiftly. And we propose the creation of a new administration to directly employ displaced oil and gas workers to actually have the infrastructure and to have field offices to do this work in perpetuity, because we know that the volume is huge and the failure rate of plug jobs will necessitate that.
Thank you, Ms. Biven. And I wanted to pivot a little bit into terms of wages and worker conditions. We've been seeing lately that even as profits increased, average wages in the industry are declining, and and what we're seeing as well is that half of some of these folks surveyed in a document I'd like to submit to the record have lost their jobs at least once prior to 2020. Ms. Biven, do you believe that there's sufficient government oversight on offshore worker safety?
No.
And how do you believe we can change this?
We could craft actual uniform rules instead of delegating to an industry trade group to create those rules and to the operator themselves. You know, it's very deferential to the operator, and workers don't have a union. They really have no one on their side if that something is unsafe that is happening. And so uniform, predictable rules and a regulator that is empowered to enforce them, not just to suggest them, I think would go a very long way. And this staggered leasing schedule provides us an opportunity to pause and really evaluate the program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your insight. I yield back to the chair.
Representative Ocasio-Cortez, did you want to submit something for the record?
Yes.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to recognize the full chair, Representative Westerman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Stauber, thank you to the witnesses. I'll try to be brief. Director Klein, the department issued the 24-29 through 29 5-year plan. For the first time since 1996, there won't be a sale. There's no sale proposed in 2024. Why is that?
The proposed lease sale schedule that the Secretary included in the proposed program after she evaluated all the factors that she's required to under Section 18 of OXLA determined that those sales best meet our nation's energy needs while balancing the range of factors she's required to consider.
So it was an administrative failure. The Inflation Reduction Act requires the Secretary to hold an offshore oil and gas lease sale within a year before offering a single offshore wind lease. That's not an interagency memo. That's not a directive from the White House. That's a law passed by the House, passed by the Senate, and signed by the President. With only 3 offshore oil and gas lease sales scheduled to occur by 2029, what led the administration to abandon the goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030?
Well, thank you very much for that question. We have a robust list of projects in the queue right now, and additional offshore wind lease sales scheduled for next year. We feel confident in meeting the target.
How are you going to do that if you don't have how are you going to follow the law and do that if you don't have a gas or oil lease by then?
Yes, no, thank you for that question. We have an oil and gas lease sale scheduled to take place on November 8th, so we'll have another year to hold offshore wind lease sales
November 8th of this year?
Of this year. And then we have a full year to hold additional offshore wind lease sales.
So you're going to have a lease
next
sale
year.
on November 8th and award a sale?
We have lease sale 261 in the Gulf of Mexico is scheduled for November 8th, yes.
How will having only 3 more lease sales hurt the goal of 30 gigawatts of wind by 2030? Or how would it help that?
Thank you. We have projects in the queue right now, a number of which are under environmental review. Our estimates show at least those projects alone will reach 27 gigawatts by close to 2030. We have additional projects that we expect to be proposed to us in the coming months. And so we feel confident we're going to hit our 30 gigawatt offshore wind goal by 2030. 30 gigawatt goal by 2030.
So in Table 8 of your plan, it concluded that having 5 lease sales emits fewer carbon equivalent emissions than no lease sales because we are substituting dirtier foreign produced energy sources and not having to transport them halfway around the world. It then concludes that having 10 lease sales emits fewer carbon emissions than having none. It's also better for national security, better for jobs, and better for the economy. So why are we not having 10 sales or 5 sales if you have a goal of reducing global emissions?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the analysis shows that when you consider the full life cycle, greenhouse gas emissions from the no sale option versus other potential scenarios we've outlined in the proposed plan, that the emission scenarios look very similar and don't fully account for the administration's goals of meeting net zero pathways by 2050. And so, as I mentioned, the Secretary determined that the 3 lease sales that we've scheduled in the proposed final program are best meet our energy needs, fully consider the whole range of factors under OXLA, and will help us meet our climate goals.
And I believe when you cut through all the the administrative jargon that the American public and certainly this committee, at least part of this committee, realizes that this administration has an all-out attack on domestic energy and on domestic mining, which is illustrated in the policies that you're putting forth and which American consumers are paying the price for. Mr. Moses, can you provide some background on what the Cook Inlet means to Alaska energy security and how the governor sees Alaskan natural resources and their role in American energy and national security?
Thank you for the question again. The Cook Inlet region supplies the vast majority of natural gas to the majority of Alaskan citizens, and it's critical to our energy costs for our citizens. And to go a little further, for our mineral development, that's also another problem we're having with the Ambler mining district, which is under law supposed to have access to.
Mr. Moses, my time's expired. I'm going to yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Representative Kamala Agredov, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today when there's nothing else going on. So, Director Klein, a few weeks ago, the subcommittee held a hearing on a bill that would force BOEM to hold 4 offshore oil and gas lease sales over 2 years with no environmental review. Can you briefly tell us why it is essential that BOEM conduct analysis specific to each lease sale?
Thank you for that question. We conduct environmental review at each stage in the leasing process, and so we are in the midst of finishing up the environmental review for the program itself. And then for the leases that are scheduled in the 5-year plan, we then conduct an environmental review, which, as I mentioned, we started last month, in order to do the more site-specific analysis of where those lease sales will occur and ensure that we are fully evaluating the potential impacts of the sales themselves and any potential mitigations or issues that we should take into account as we move closer to the lease sale stage.
Sounds important to me in terms of gathering comprehensive data and information preceding the sales. So thank you for that. Ms. Biven, in your testimony, you cite some distressing statistics about Louisiana's offshore oil and gas industry. I will read a couple out loud so we can be on the same page, if you don't mind. So Louisiana is a top 3 natural gas producing state, yet first in the nation for poverty. Louisiana is home to 1/5 of the nation's refining capacity, yet 47th for median household income. Louisiana's ports handled 35% of the nation's total gas exports in 2022, yet has the 5th highest infant mortality rate and 2nd highest maternal death rate. There are 29 petrochemical plants and 12 LNG export facilities, yet homeowners' insurance is becoming so hard to come by that families are sliding into poverty. So, Ms. Biven, do you believe that most Louisianans are benefiting from the offshore oil and gas and petrochemical industries?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Who is benefiting instead?
Shareholders, people at the top, people don't live in Louisiana.
Thank you for that. I see that this is a pattern repeated nationwide. So what I've been reading, and I may be confused, but what I've been reading is that the United States is producing more oil than ever before, that in fact it's the highest in the world, and we are on track to set a new record this year. Also, or that oil prices increasingly have more to do with global market drives than on our U.S. production. So, Ms. Biven, can you explain or expand on the dynamics between American production and exports of oil and natural gas and how those dynamics affect American consumers?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is that we are pivoting from a posture of energy security for Americans to one of export, and is being framed as we're being constrained, and that is what is causing the increase in prices. But the volatility is completely due to global financial trading. You know, some oil and gas majors make more from their trading floors than the actual sale of the commercial products. And that is putting, American citizens at a very distressing place. Even though we are the largest producer of oil and gas, even though we have all of these resources, regular Americans don't see those benefits. Would love a sovereign wealth fund for our country, would love a greater ownership of those resources. I often think, like, what would it be like if we were to be like Norway, if we had a sovereign wealth fund, if we had a state-owned oil and gas company like Equinor, where each citizen has $250,000 per citizen, and you have, I think it's $2 trillion in that fund. People don't realize that the second source of highest revenue for that fund comes from the Gulf of Mexico. So we have no problem with a public benefit for these resources, just not our public.
Thank you for that, and I'm so glad you brought up Norway. I was there some years ago, and we, yes, got into that, and I thought that was an incredibly resilient sort of posture for them to take. Mr. Moses, I'm not going to ask you, but I am dying to ask if you can see Russia from your house, but I'm going to, in fact, have to yield back my time to the chair.
Thank you very much. Next up, Representative Graves for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Witnesses, I want to thank you for being here today. Good to see a few of you again, and great to meet a few of you for the first time. So first of all, I want to ask Mr. Faucheux, there was talk about Louisianians not benefiting from energy production in terms of jobs and economic activity. As I recall, I think 1 in every 7 jobs in the state of Louisiana is tied back to the energy industry. Is there a benefit to our economy, to the state's economy?
Congressman, I would point out that more than a quarter of the state's economy is based in the energy industry and the oil and gas industry. And you are correct. You don't have to go far in any Louisiana community to find multiple generations of people who have built families, careers, and livelihoods on the oil and gas industry. Louisianans want this industry. They've supported it and look forward to continuing to be able to see future generations of their families participate in it.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I continue to just be so confused by statements that I hear out of members of this committee and then facts. And so let's go through a few things. I've heard over and over again about how greenhouse gases are a priority in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. So when I look at BOEM's own assessment, I'm going to quote, "In a net zero world, as the demand for fossil fuels declines, domestic oil and gas production from lower carbon intensity fields, such as those in the OCS, because those are the lowest carbon intense barrels, could play a more important role in meeting that demand than they do currently. OCS fields could also help ensure U.S. energy security by reducing import reliance from foreign producers, most of which tend to also be higher carbon emitters than the U.S. Said another way, we need to be producing more in the OCS, not less. Going back to the Carter administration, they put out for lease 100 times more acres than have been done under this administration. You're talking about 3 lease sales. They did 36 lease sales, and again, for higher acreage, larger acreage as well. And so all of this stuff, and we keep hearing all of these policies, and this is all about greenhouse gases. When the reality is, Trump, greenhouse gases went down, Biden went up this year, last year, they're going up again. This year, they're probably going to go up again. So we're failing on emissions. Let's be very clear. We're failing on the environment. Your own analysis says that actually using more OCS production would be better for the environment. Now let's take it a step further, because what's happening with the individual family members? When President Biden took office, the average gasoline prices in Louisiana were, the lowest gasoline prices in Louisiana were $1.74 a gallon. $1.74. National average today, I believe, is $3.57. In Louisiana, the lowest price today is probably around $2.96. Not $1.74, but $2.96. According to the Census Bureau, and I've seen all sorts of statistics, but according to the Census Bureau, 1 in every 4 American families have been unable to make ends meet. Since Biden has taken office, when you take things like inflation, higher interest rates, higher grocery costs, higher utility and gasoline costs, $700 per family per month. These are the people that we're all here to represent. Let me say it again. As a result of this administration's policies, $700 per family per month is the higher cost that they're paying. We have the ability to bring prices down, just like our chairman noted in the opening statement. All of this is a result of squeezing supply. Demand is not changing. Prices are skyrocketing as a result. And then let's take a look at who's benefiting. Now, we've heard a lot of people talking about, a lot of folks have been talking about Iran and this $6 billion negotiation. The $6 billion that we freed up in funds giving to Iran when Iran is out there funding terrorists like Hamas. So here's reality. What's happening when we don't produce energy? Iran ends up filling the void. You know the $6 billion that I'm aggravated about? Let me tell you what I'm really pissed off about. I'm pissed off about the fact that this translates to $60 billion in additional funds that Iran has profited from as a result of the ignorant energy policies of this administration. $60 billion, 10 times the $6 billion that the administration released for Iran, giving it to Iran. What are they doing with Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Houthis, and Hamas with $60 billion in additional profits? We failed on affordability, we're empowering terrorists, and we're failing on the environment. This is absolutely incredible. These policies make no sense based upon math and science. None. And based upon your own analysis. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent. The ranking member noted wildfires in Louisiana. She's exactly right. Unfortunately, she left out the fact that they were actually caused by arson. I'd like to submit for the record a statement.
Without objection.
And secondly, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, the Bonacary spillway, which is our pressure relief valve for the Mississippi River when river levels are too high, was opened, normally opened every 10 years. It was opened in 2016. It was opened in 2018. For the first time in history, it was opened twice in 2019, and it was opened in 2020. Therefore, this whole drought thing on the Mississippi River, we had record high water. Normally opens every 10 years, opened 5 times in 6 years, the highest in history, showing that water levels were actually excessive in recent years as well. Yield back.
Thank you. I see nobody, no colleague on the other side of the aisle is here, so Representative Tiffany, you're up for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moses, we had testimony from an Alaskan just a couple months ago, a native Alaskan, I believe it was, who said life expectancy since 1980 has went up 13 years as a for the tribes that the native peoples that he represents up in Alaska. Does that surprise you?
Not at all. I think not only for oil and gas development, mining development, you'll see those communities. The economic improvement in those communities lifts all standards of life, so it's not surprising at all.
And is it your understanding it's the improvement of their lifestyle that has caused this 13-year increase in life expectancy?
Absolutely.
I mean, think about that, Mr. Chairman. I was stunned. I have to say I was stunned when I heard that data, that this is a native Alaskan, that their life expectancy went up 13 years since 1980. It's incredible. Producing energy here in America can help people live a longer life, live a happier life. Mr. Seibel, do you think pipelines are important? Do you think refineries are important?
Absolutely.
Does the Southern Ute Economic Fund, do they rely on those refineries, pipelines, and other infrastructure to be able to get the product that you're producing to market?
Absolutely, it does.
What do you say to other tribes that are opposed to any production or transport of hydrocarbons, of energy?
Any other tribe? You know, as tribes, we're really coming together for that self-determination, the right to govern ourselves. And so we're all on board, whatever God has blessed us with under their reservation, our respective reservations. We encourage one another to develop your resources on your reservation. And so us Indians are getting together and we're supporting one another. And when we do that, powerful things happen. And, we're excited for that.
Thank you for that. Ms. Klein, the were you involved with the voluntary settlement agreement in regards to the Rice's Whale back in July of 2023?
Thank you for the question. BOEM has taken some actions in order to try and protect the Rice's whale, which is a critically endangered species in the Gulf of Mexico, including releasing a notice to lessees to undertake some recommended measures to try and protect the whale, including slowing vessel traffic speeds, not transiting
Thank you. I have
through
a
a certain
follow-up.
area.
I have a follow-up. So they're saying that they want to protect the Rice's whale. So have you done some study on what's happening to whales on the East Coast, where people are where some people are concerned, there's not solid proof yet, but there's great concern that there's a lot of whales that are washing up on the shores on our East Coast, and that might be because of the wind farms that are the wind facilities that are being put up. Let me pose a question. Are you studying that?
Thank you for the question. BOEM shares concerns about the unusual mortality event.
Are you
and
studying that?
We have an environmental studies program and a Center for Marine Acoustics.
Are you
that's-
studying that specifically on
that's
the East Coast?
undertaking the potential, looking at the potential impacts of offshore wind on
Okay.
whales and marine mammals.
Thank you. Ms. Biven, I see you live in Vienna. And have you followed the increased use of coal in Germany?
Yes, because they retired their nuclear fleet. Yes,
Do you support nuclear?
yes.
Okay. And have you done an analysis of the life cycle of renewables, of what we call renewables?
I have not personally carried out a life cycle of renewable. I'm more familiar with oil
Do
and gas.
you support, we're retiring ag land, for example, in my home state of Wisconsin, we're retiring ag land or converting it to wind and solar. Do you think that's a good public policy choice?
I think they can coexist in certain areas. It just depends on what's the best use for the area.
Do you think it's good to retire productive agricultural land?
Perhaps for the benefit of the soil. I mean, I don't know what the background for those decisions would be. It depends on a case by case.
I'm just going to close it with this, Mr. Chairman. I thought the ranking member said it very well. She said, we are seeking managed decline. And managed decline is exactly what's happening. My colleague, Mr. Graves, cited it very well. When you have Iran that is producing more oil as a result of us not producing it and turning it into bombs. You know, we have to consider foreign policy also with issues like this. And they're turning it into weaponry that is destabilizing the Middle East as we speak, funding Hamas, funding Hezbollah. We see what is happening as a result of managed decline right here in the United States of America. We're declining on the world stage. Our economic well-being is in decline, and it's directly tied to having affordable energy. When we have low energy prices in America, we have prosperity. When we have high energy prices, diesel fuel moves the world. When we have high energy prices, we have economic decline in America, and that's exactly what's happening on this administration's watch. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Tiffany. Before we close, before I have closing comments, Representative Ocasio-Cortez would like to put something in the record.
I'd seek unanimous consent to submit to the record reporting from Vox around the Louisiana wildfires.
Without objection.
Thank you.
I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Monday, October 23rd. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.